In 1873, a man stopped a moving train, walked inside, and robbed it at gunpoint. It was the first time in American history anyone had ever done that. Within a few years, hundreds of men were doing the exact same thing. Trains, banks, stagecoaches, entire towns. For about 50 years, a huge stretch of America had almost no law at all. No police you could count on, no courts nearby, no backup coming. Just you, a gun, and whatever you could hold on to. We call it the Wild West. And the strangest part isn't how wild it got. It's how fast it appeared, and how fast it vanished. Because this entire era, the outlaws, the gold, the cowboys, the gunfights, all of it, fit inside a single human lifetime. Here's how the most lawless chapter in American history began, exploded, and then got erased. It started with a purchase. In 1803, the United States bought a piece of land so massive it doubled the size of the entire country overnight. Over 800,000 square miles. For about $15 million. To put that in perspective, that land today would be worth trillions, but at the time, here's the wild part. Almost nobody knew what was actually out there. No maps, no roads, no idea. The government had just bought the biggest mystery in its history and had to figure out what it just paid for. So it sent people to go look. And what they found would set off a chain reaction nobody could stop. The explorers came back with reports of endless rivers, towering mountains, and forests that went on forever. But one detail lit the fuse. Beavers. This sounds ridiculous today, but back then, beaver fur was one of the most valuable materials on Earth. Every wealthy man in Europe wanted a hat made of it. So a strange breed of men went west to cash in. They were called mountain men. They lived completely alone in the wilderness for months, trapping, hunting, surviving bear attacks, speaking to no one. And by chasing beaver money into the unknown, they accidentally carved out the trails that everyone else would soon follow. Because once the trails existed, ordinary families started using them. They loaded everything they owned into wooden wagons and set out on the Oregon Trail. 2,000 miles. 6 months of walking. And it was brutal. Disease, starvation, river crossings, mountain passes that could freeze them alive. Historians estimate tens of thousands died along these westward trails. Roughly 1 in 10 never made it. Think about that. You'd stand at the edge of the map, look west, and know there was a real chance you'd never arrive. And people still went? Because a rumor was spreading that out there, the ground itself was hiding something. The rumor was true. In 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall was building a sawmill in California when something in the water caught his eye. He reached down and pulled out a small, heavy golden lump. Gold. He tried to keep it secret. He failed almost immediately. The news detonated across the country and then across the world. What followed was the largest voluntary migration America had ever seen. Around 300,000 people abandoned their entire lives to race toward California. They were called the 49ers, after the year the rush truly exploded, 1849, and the transformation was insane. A tiny settlement called San Francisco went from a few hundred people to tens of thousands in just a few years. Ships sailed into the harbor and were simply left there to rot, because the second the crews docked, they ran off to dig for gold. The bay filled with abandoned ghost ships, an entire fleet left behind because gold fever hit harder than loyalty to a paycheck. And here's something most people never connect. While all of this was happening, the country itself was still physically growing. The war with Mexico ended in 1848, and almost overnight, the United States gained California, Nevada, Utah, and enormous portions of the Southwest. More land, more gold, more people flooding in every single month. The problem was all of this was spread across a continent with no fast way to connect it. A letter from the East Coast to California could take months. So America went to war with distance itself. The first weapon was the Pony Express, a relay chain of horse riders that could rush a letter from Missouri to California in about 10 days. Riders swapped horses every few miles and rode through storms, deserts, and dangerous territory to keep the mail moving. 10 days felt like magic, but it didn't last long, because something even faster was already coming: the telegraph. Metal wires strung across the whole continent that could send a message in seconds using electricity. The moment the telegraph lines connected coast to coast, The Pony Express became obsolete almost instantly. And then came the big one, the Transcontinental Railroad. Two armies of workers, one pushing west, one pushing east, laying track toward each other for years. In 1869, they finally met in Utah and drove in a ceremonial golden spike. A journey that once cost 6 months of suffering now took about a week, sitting in a chair. But every mile of that progress came with a cost that's often left out. The land wasn't empty. Hundreds of Native American nations had lived across these territories for thousands of years with their own governments, languages, and cultures. As settlers and railroads pushed west, those nations were pushed off the land they had always known. And the buffalo, tens of millions of animals central to their entire way of life, were hunted down at an industrial scale until almost none remained. The West being opened for some meant the West being taken from others. That contradiction sits at the center of this entire era. Now let's talk about cowboys because the real ones were almost nothing like the legend. Forget the slick gunslinger in a clean hat. A real cowboy was an exhausted, underpaid laborer whose entire job was moving cattle. And the reason the job existed came down to simple math. After the Civil War, a cow worth about $20 in Texas could sell for 10 times that in the northern cities. The demand was enormous. The profit was enormous. Someone just had to move 2,000 cattle across hundreds of miles of open, dangerous land. So cowboys drove massive herds up routes like the Chisholm Trail, an 800-mile grind from Texas to the railroads in Kansas, 3 straight months in the saddle. A single lightning strike could send the whole herd into a stampede. A single river crossing could drown a chunk of your cattle and your profit, and you slept in the dirt the entire time. It wasn't glamorous. It was one of the hardest, dirtiest jobs in the country. Wherever those cattle trails slammed into the railroads, towns erupted out of nowhere. Abilene, Dodge City, Tombstone, empty prairie one month, roaring boomtown the next, saloons, gambling halls, money everywhere. And where there's fast money and no law, there's always someone ready to take it. Enter the outlaw era. The railroads had created a massive weakness. They were hauling gold and cash across hundreds of miles of lawless frontier with almost no security. It was practically begging to be robbed. So it was. Names like Jesse James became legends for hitting banks and trains across the country. Billy the Kid became infamous as a young gunfighter before he was even 21. But the most successful of them all were Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who led a gang known as the Wild Bunch. Their method was simple and terrifying. Block the tracks, force the train to stop, board it with guns drawn, then blow the safe wide open with dynamite and disappear on horseback before anyone could organize a response. Sometimes the dynamite worked perfectly. Sometimes they used far too much, and the stolen cash literally rained down out of the sky in burning pieces. Then they'd scoop up what they could and vanish into the wilderness. But the outlaws' golden age was built to collapse. The railroads fought back by hiring a private detective force called the Pinkertons, an army of hired hunters whose entire job was tracking these men down. Wanted posters went up across the West. Safes got stronger. And the telegraph meant a warning could now travel faster than any horse could run. One by one, the famous outlaws were caught or killed. But Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid did something no one expected. They fled thousands of miles away to South America. And to this day, historians still argue about what truly happened to them. Their ending remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the era. And then came the strangest twist of all. The Wild West started selling tickets to itself. While the real frontier was still barely cooling down, a former scout and buffalo hunter named Buffalo Bill Cody turned the whole thing into a traveling spectacle. His Wild West shows packed enormous crowds from New York all the way to Europe. Real cowboys performed rope tricks. A sharpshooter named Annie Oakley, and who could outshoot nearly any man alive, split playing cards in midair. The irony was almost poetic. The real Wild West was dying in real time, and Buffalo Bill was already charging admission to watch a fake one. The final act was the most chaotic land grab in American history. The government had originally set aside Oklahoma Territory for Native Americans. Then it reversed course and decided to open millions of acres to settlers. So, on a single day in 1889, tens of thousands of people lined up along a border like runners waiting for a starting gun. Wagons, horses, families clutching claim papers, all frozen, waiting for a single signal. At noon, the guns fired, and the crowd exploded forward in the greatest land stampede ever recorded. By sunset, entire cities existed where there had been nothing but grass at sunrise. Oklahoma City went from 0 to around 10,000 people in a matter of hours, cities being born in a single afternoon. And with that, the map filled in. The last open territories became states faster than mapmakers could keep up. By 1912, Arizona and New Mexico joined the Union, and the America we recognize today was essentially complete. Here's what makes the whole thing so strange. The Wild West didn't slowly fade into history. It was bulldozed by its own progress. The railroads, the telegraph, and the law it helped create are the very things that killed it. In roughly a single human lifetime, America went from an unmapped mystery to a fully connected, tamed continent. So completely tamed, in fact, that it had to hire actors to remind people what wild ever felt like. The most lawless era in American history lasted about 50 years, long enough to create legends, short enough that a child born at the start of it could have watched the whole thing disappear before they grew old. An entire wild world, built, burned, and buried inside one lifetime. Subscribe. Because the strangest chapters of history are the ones that vanish almost as fast as they appear.